welcome. My name is Zeli Capitan Tavares. I'm an elementary teacher at McMurray Junior Public School in the Toronto District School Board. I have the honor of working with my students during the morning, and I have this other role, a hybrid teacher, digitally learner, where during the afternoon, as part of a team, we provide system-wide support focused on global competencies and leveraging technology.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahfouza Rahman, and I too am a hybrid teacher digitally learner here in the Toronto District School Board. My other half, just like Zelia, I'm an in-classroom teacher. I teach at Western Collegiate Institute, where I'm a high school science teacher. So thank you for joining us.
And today we will be discussing Keep Calm and Flip On, create content to support remote learning and student engagement using Flipgrid. Now, before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, if you have any questions during the session, we encourage you to ask them as they come up. Just use the chat, the Q&A, by selecting the Q&A button on your screen and then putting those questions into the window. As a team, we'll do our best to respond to the questions in real time.
Secondly, please note that you will have access to the session on demand through the conference portal for the next year. And finally, this session also has been closed captioned. You can turn on this feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your media player.
All right, let's get started. We would like to acknowledge that we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
So what we have on tap for our session today is the following. Here's our agenda. What is Flipgrid? We're going to give you a little bit of an overview and why use it. Some of the topics we hope to cover with you: social emotional learning, asynchronous learning and sharing, moderated response, and finally, Flipgrid AR, Mixtapes, and Grid Pals. So in terms of students, how do they access Flipgrid topics and video recordings, and give you some tips and tricks and resources, as well as answer your questions you might have during this session.
So what is Flipgrid used for? Well, cards on the table. Nothing replicates or replaces our in-person, real-time interactions with our class community learning and making connections. We need to, however, continue to find ways to support students in identifying their feelings and understand how their emotions can affect their well-being.
Many of our students are committed to engage in and continue their learning journey, but they're definitely feeling a sense of discomfort as a result of the pandemic disruption. Students are experiencing a loss during remote learning. Their friendships, relationships with peers and educators, how they are able to interact with each other within the community, and the change of their home routines as families work from home, siblings sharing devices and responsibilities to support change or increase.
More than ever, we need to provide students with opportunities to scaffold their learning and give them access to tools that will amplify their voice, to connect ideas and share their own experiences. We as teachers are more than just content providers.
So we want to briefly show you how we access Flipgrid and just give you a sense of how you would use this tool within your districts. So as an educator, you would log in to Flipgrid using your district credentials. Your second step would be to actually create a grid. We have three options. We would choose add a new grid. This will act as our classroom. All the topics within the grid, which will be the tasks which our students complete. And there are three ways we can add students. So to make a grid, what we also need to do is select the grid type. Do remember to label your grid. One of the things that we've noticed with our students as well as our colleagues is to not leave anything untitled. We found it really useful to use the school email as a way of keeping this tool within the district. And one of the things that you will have to check with your district is if your educators and your students have different identifiers like we do in our in the TDSB. I've made this mistake personally where I've done at TDSB only for the school email, forgetting my students have that extra student .tdsb. It's a great way of setting up this tool for remote learning, as well as keeping things within your district. So let's take a closer look at this grid. So the grid will be your home for your class in Flipgrid. It's their landing page. They'll be able to collaborate, connect with peers or their grid pals. You can add co-managers or co-teachers to your space in your grid, as well as your topics. You can post unlimited discussion prompts in your grid, and they're known as topics. So your grid would be your home base. Topics would be the different assignments, if you will. Now, what we've suggested for our teachers in our district to streamline the process is to create a grid, one grid for their class, and then create as many topics as they need within the grid. So to create a topic for students to respond to in the grid, we would go to add a new topic. This was a really yummy example. So our title here, it was about cooking and baking in action. We could set the time length that we wanted, and so we've set it to 2 minutes 30 seconds, giving them ample opportunity to explain what they're doing. In our prompt, we typed out the instructions for our students here, and really cool, you can put a focus. So here, because it's all about baking, why not chocolate chip cookies? Now just, you can also do topic tips. So it's a reminder that this to the students, and they'll see it while they're recording their video. So an example of some top tips: look into the camera, speak slowly, cite your evidence. We can also add resources such as a document, a PDF, or slides that we want them to refer back to support them with their topic. We also can take a look at the status, which will allow the topic status. You can either allow students to reply to each other. You can moderate the videos, meaning it will be seen, whether it's seen automatically as soon as they post, or whether you as a teacher will approve it and give feedback before posting. You can also set dates as to when to deactivate your grid or freeze your grid. Now, some of the cool features in the video feature, these options will allow us as teachers to customize the features that students will have access to, like likes, views, in terms, count of views, etc. So as a teacher, you will make the decisions whether you want these options turned off or on. Sticky notes are pretty cool. You can also take a look at the feedback option. The basic feedback gives the option of teachers to provide private feedback. Custom feedback allows teachers to add a rubric as well.
All right, friends. So here are some examples that we're just going to share from our own class communities. Due to the school closures, we took a different direction. So we realized we needed to find ways for students to share and reach out. We are immersed in this pandemic, which is affecting us in different ways, both at our work and in our home lives. We need to take care of our own sense of well-being and our own family's health and practice physical distancing. So how do we continue to build community through remote learning? Well, we relooked at our grid and created a new one as an opportunity to introduce ourselves again and share some of the changes that we're experiencing due to the school closures. But we realized very quickly that the social emotional learning needs to continue to be offered for students, and we need to guide them and providing opportunities for mindfulness activities, well-being, or a well-being bingo, and sharing a moment where they've demonstrated a growth mindset while remote learning. Even offering suggestions on how to be positive and keep busy while we are stuck in our own homes. During COVID-19, and in any continued remote learning situation, with all of the unknowns, we still want to find student engagement into meaningful tasks which allow them to take ownership of their learning. We want this to constantly be evolving as they have access to resources, equipment, and support will vary from home to home. So reading is something that many of us are quite passionate about. And so promoting different reading mediums and access to these resources to engage in reading while remote learning can include things like audiobooks, ebooks, a hard copy, links to the local library so they can access and book these resources. And so students were able to share some of their favorite books that they've been reading and record them. Let's go check out an example here. And what's really exciting, we included a link to a book report write-up that they could write, and they could do more than one submission. And an example of that is here as well. And let's hear an example.
Hello, marvelous humans. I am Eva, and today we're going to talk about book recommendations. The book I'm going to be showing today is Narwhal Unicorn of the Sea.
Now, continuing on the premise of reading and reading supports, we have our English language learners in our class communities, and we are very fortunate in our class community to have a new student. But unfortunately, our new student joined us 8 school days before the school closure. And so we really needed to rethink how we were going to support our student in sharing their reading, both in their own language and learning how to speak English at the same time so that we could provide ongoing guidance and support and sharing appropriate texts. So using the immersive reader built-in features really allowed to support differentiated instruction. It also includes audio versions of the text to support our ELL students. So listening to text in both their own spoken language and in English really allowed them to have something modeled, but as well as to share their own progress.
I read The Mood and the Moon. This book talks about Mood. She's the a new forest pet. She doesn't have friends. She meets squirrel, bird, bear, mole, and deer.
Now, one tricky thing was, how do I continue to work on our writing program while my students are working in their own homes and may or may not have access to certain types of materials to continue with their writing practice? And all our anchor charts are sitting up in our very empty classrooms. Well, we had to redesign the lessons so that they can asynchronously design and put into action some things that they can reflect on and work on within their homes. So for some students, they may or may not have parent or guardian support available or to guide them through their tasks. And the lessons needed to allow flexibility for the varying entry points for students to be creative and to share their learning. So we thought, let's cook. And so here was an opportunity for students to share some recipes or some ways that they prepare their meals while at home for themselves or for their families, as we are all dealing with the quarantine and the closures at this time. And continuing with the writing, and our young authors are always looking for opportunities to tell their story. And Zain, help me here, Makusa.
Sorry, I did what we normally do. Talk with my unmute zine.
It's a zine. See, I always get so self-conscious. I'm like, oh no, okay.
That's okay. My apologies.
So the students designed a one-pager zine. Okay, and we recognize that some students may not have paper readily available at home, and we can't make these assumptions that all these materials are there for them. With the school closures and stores closing their doors, and local businesses either are closed or had limited access at different points of this pandemic. So access to hopefully one page to have them tell their story. And for some students, they were able to take on this current learning challenge in stride. So they designed their zine and they read it to the camera. And so I will share one quick example just to show you just some of the enthusiasm. Now, again, I work with a grade 4 class community with integrated homeschooling program known as HSP, where the students are performing 2 to 3 years behind the academic grade level. Well, I'm going to tell you straight up, there are more than one occasion where they rose and they absolutely shine. as they were provided access to materials and resources to let them share how much they really know.
Hello, this is my design. Spider-Man PS4. No. Up there. Spider-Man is amazing. He can web sling in New York City. Spider-Man uses his spider sense to locate danger.
Anti-racist education is not an event. Ongoing discussions, access to resources, and opportunities to ask questions have been happening throughout our school year. And we talk about how hate is something that is taught within our environments, and how can we change and engage in discussions with family and friends to acknowledge our privilege, and how we must be an ally and speak up with assistance from an adult as needed. But students really appreciate that there is a lot that can still be learned. And as we engage in discussions happening in the world around us, locally and our neighboring countries and places around the world, while we all practice physical distancing. Being able to find the words to share with family and friends on why they are taking part in local Black Lives Matters protests is so important for them, as they feel empowered that they can do something and that they do have a voice and that they are in a position of privilege to bring about change. So these are several of the links of videos that we've discussed in class in most recent weeks. We have a collaborative Jamboard. We've begun to brainstorm some of our ideas, and this is ongoing. What Flipgrid has also provided us during this time of remote learning is an opportunity to give them ways to make meaningful contributions, have discussions, to share thoughts and pose questions, while adding value to their own learning experiences. As we, or the students, unlearn and relearn to address our own assumptions and values as to what gender-based bias means, learning to build a better understanding and accepting of identities that make up an individual or a couple or a family, and learning to ask people for their preferred pronouns, and unlearning gender roles, and feeling safe in our class community to have these discussions, and then continuing these discussions and being allies beyond the safety of our virtual classroom meeting or within the class walls of a brick and mortar building.
Thanks, Zell. So as Zelia mentioned, we have been teaching and learning in it's a very unusual time and circumstance. We've had to quickly figure out a different way to implement the social emotional component of our teaching. As a former guidance counselor, I also realized the nature of teachers being in the front line when it comes to mental health of our students. In person, we're able to sense when a student is bothered by something, or by their body language, their tone of their voice, or their interaction with their peers. Our ability to gauge how our students are doing based on our in-person interaction has been greatly reduced. So using Flipgrid with my students after the March break here in Ontario, before diving into science, the content of our course, I wanted to do a check-in with my students. Flipgrid allowed me to hear their emotion in their voice, which I would not necessarily have been able to get from a written response. So one of the challenges of delivering our classes, especially when we have courses where there's a hands-on component, is to figure out how do we recreate it in an authentic way. I know one of the reasons that some of my students look forward to science is that there's a hands-on component to the course. So in addition to the theory, how do I get them to do something, and how do I see them do the science at home? So this is where Flipgrid came in again. After having learned different types or classification of reactions, I asked them to look around their own homes. Let's go hunt them and see what we can find. It got them up and actively engaged in their learning process and participating and making the content meaningful in the space where they're in at this moment in time. So this app is still relatively new to my students, and in all honesty, me too. I'm probably a little bit ahead of them. And they being uncertain about the task at hand, meaning what does she mean by hunting for a chemical reaction? I created an example of a chemical reaction which I found at my house. I modeled what I wanted them to share with me to see whether they understood the concepts that we had just learned. Something that I needed to be more explicit. So my own learning from my example was that I would have, I'd asked them to create the word equation so you can see the text on the video. I had just done it generically because I didn't want to give them the answers should they want to use the same reaction. I wanted to see their understanding, but some of my students copied exactly word for word what I had on the screen, and I had not read my instructions. So this is something that I'm internalizing as an educator and figuring out how I would change that up for next year. Hey, science class. So some of you were wondering what I meant by hunting for a chemical reaction at home. So here at my house, I quickly looked for a chemical reaction. As you can see, there were quite a few responses in the grid, and this is one of the 2 science classes that I had this semester, and it was quite heartening. I know this is not the full class, but given that this assignment was given last week to my students as we're winding down the school year remotely, my students are losing steam, and I can't blame them because I know those of us who are still teaching are doing the same thing too. We're losing steam. So it was really great to see them engage in their learning and that they actively took part in this activity. It was eye-opening for me as a teacher to also see what misconceptions my students had, and this assignment allowed it to be more apparent so that I could address it. So there were a few things that came up while using Flipgrid this semester that I thought I'd share with you that might make your Flipgrid journey more smoother one. My students wanted and needed me to make a video showing them how to maneuver this space. The video I shared was the video that they requested, my students, as they didn't understand how to upload their videos in Flipgrid. They were using their own devices and not necessarily the app's video ability. I've mentioned previously, it was super helpful for my students to have an example of a topic so that they were better able to understand my expectations for the assignment. Thinking about how I'd use it in the future, I'm thinking I could use it as a digital lab notebook, since being a science teacher, somewhere where my students can document their doing of science. I was also thinking about how I could suggest the usage of Flipgrid to my colleagues in my school, how they could use it in their different courses and the courses that I've supported in the past as a teacher librarian. So I was thinking in Writer's Craft, they could record an interview, since they do interview different people in their lives. In history or civics, or I know some of you have a course called government, what about if they created a campaign video, since many of us run mock elections? We have a course called Food and Nutrition, where they actually learn the science behind food and nutrition. They also do create and actually perform or make recipes. So how about if they recreated a family favorite or created a recipe and videoed that? We also have exercise science, where I know in the past I've had to support colleagues bringing up their students to the library to create an exercise routine. So instead of on paper, create it on video, have them video an exercise routine. All right, so some of the challenges I've encountered, I've had conversations with MIEs, and it's been amazing to see what Zelia, I'm so impressed with what her students have accomplished. What we've noticed, though, from our different conversations is that there's some challenges in high school. So if the thought is that just because they're on social media or just because they're in Generation Z, that they will take to the app or they will know how to use the app, you're wrong. It doesn't mean that they'll actually understand the app or actually take to it. It's not the same as their platforms that they use, or the purpose for which they use those platforms is very different. My purpose of using this app is, how do I get them to translate those skills? Those are important skills from their personal life into their academic life. It would be a huge game changer, as they tend to silo their knowledge. Also, we need to think about audience. The audience is too close to home for them. It's their peers and us. We're too familiar. As a high school science teacher, I found I had more of an uptake for the usage of my app when we started off with moderated topics, so their posts aren't available for everyone to see right away or everyone at all. Last year, when I used this in my science class, I didn't start with a moderated topic, which detracted my students from being comfortable or interested in the tool, and then it was a hard sell to sustain its meaningful use in our class. So I realized that with my students in particular, that I need to give them time to acclimatize to the space, to use it as a tool to communicate with me first as being their only audience before opening it up to a broader audience. Yes, Flipgrid is an amazing tool, but thinking about, I want us to think about how we can use it to amplify our students' learning and understanding in our subject area, or you've seen in Zelia's example, an extracurricular activity, as well as the broader school.
And that's a nice segue into how we've been using it as a club. So our clubs kind of came to a standstill as a result of the school closures, and several students really felt, and they did reach out and asked for a virtual club so they can continue having a safe space to engage in discussions. So providing a safe virtual space for students to share reflections and, again, ask questions, to connect, and more importantly, to celebrate, was what Flipgrid allowed our Connects Club to do. Taking on a teachable moment is really an opportunity to rethink our practices, and we reestablish some of our social norms so that we can have real deep discussions about deconstructing the gender dichotomy in our club that had both students who identified LGBTQ or students who were allies. So our class community, our club communities, our school communities, and friends were all there to support each other and to go on this learning journey together. However, you choose how to address your own needs in your own school communities. This was one that just came up based on the request of the students. Another way is perhaps considering providing students with their own topic. So we have a grid called Students in Action, Minecraft EDU. And the students wanted to continue working on their redesign of their dream school. And they wanted to give a tour of the school. Now, sitting there for an hour watching a video of just like the inception of their idea in Minecraft, it's probably not the best use of time, and they tend to go on different pathways with their storytelling. But having shorter, focused videos of their concept build in Minecraft within Flipgrid was a great way to get a snapshot to the design elements, to their thinking, and it really just reminded me that this is a passion project for so many of the students, and the impact of student voice, and to advocate for my students by providing them leadership opportunities really just came out of using a Flipgrid to support their passion projects.
Hello! Welcome to part 2 of my Minecraft Dream School. Today I'll be going over the science class. So let me just get up here. Yeah. So we have an NPC here, a statement on the board here.
Mixtapes is something new. I only just explored it during the remote learning at this time. And it came up when students asked to see examples of what we felt were exemplars in student submissions on Flipgrid. And so really it's a collection of student videos from across any grid or topic, and you compile them into your own mixtape. And so we tried it as a class based on peer feedback of student videos that were strong examples to our class responses for others to refer to and to be inspired to make their own contributions.
So the book that I like to read, or maybe you should read too, is How to Speak a Dog.
So Grid Pals. Grid Pals are a digital spin on pen pals, using Flipgrid to increase social learning, global empathy, and cultural understanding. At this time, our Grid Pals with students stalled, while other Grid Pals didn't launch, as we had to make the hard decisions on what to continue and what to pause on during distant and remote learning. As we wrap up the school year, and with many unknowns looking ahead to our next school year, our students continue to recognize that learning will float between synchronous and asynchronous activities and lessons, which is even more emphasized as we learn remotely from our own homes. Let's be honest, this isn't seamless, and the school closures, along with physical social distancing, are having varying impacts on our students and their family well-being and household responsibilities to family member needs. Flipgrid is a tool that has provided our students a forum to stay connected, listen to their peers, and highlight their own learning.
And really that has given us quite the window into a learning that we would not have otherwise have had. And so we want to thank you, everyone, for joining, and we will continue to answer questions in the Q&A window for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Mufasa, you rock.
Thank you, you too. Virtual high five.
Woo-hoo.